Ad safety and product safety is essentially what we're talking about, but it's the new arenas that have come broken into our world that Siobhan has spoken about already, that we really want to focus on, how they fit into the old and whether they are transforming the old. Alexi, first of all, I suppose if we can begin with the Times investigation that you carried out into where some of the biggest names in advertising were finding themselves, and alongside whom. Do you want to explain your Times investigation?
Sure. Well, first of all, we didn't start off by going after Facebook or Google. We started off because we were told that there was something rotten in the state of the media agency business. So apologies for anyone that is in that. But essentially what we were told was that there was this kind of opacity and complexity in the middle between brands on the one hand and publishers on the other hand. And the guys in the middle were in some cases exploiting this opacity and complexity to kind of rinse profits out of the brands, not necessarily in their own interests. And that split into two main series of allegations. One was on rebates, which is a kind of long-running controversial issue. But the other one was around programmatic advertising. And the allegations that we were hearing was that in some cases, media agencies were pushing clients into programmatic, not in their own interests, but because programmatic was so complicated and so technical that they could get huge amounts of profits and huge amount of profit margins out without the brands knowing about it.
And by programmatic, you mean really targeted advertising, using the information available online about people?
That's right. I mean, they work, in some cases, quite a lot like trading desks at banks. They use very complicated, automatically generated computer algorithms to buy and sell ads in the kind of the milliseconds that it takes to load a web page. In quite a lot of cases, the use of programmatic and the purchase of programmatic ads by an agency, that kind of contractual relationship is not visible to the brand who has another contract with the agency, which doesn't allow them to kind of look past the main contract.
So some of the best known names that all of us in this room will have heard of were alongside ISIS videos you found. Just elaborate on what you found a little, if you would.
So once we understood that there was something wrong, we still were faced with a problem. It was kind of a businessy story, a consumer story. But once we understood that programmatic, one of the consequences of programmatic was that the brands often didn't know where their ads were being placed. Mm-hmm. Then we could look for examples to see how that manifested itself. And what we found, that's when the focus slightly switched to Google and YouTube, because what we found was in quite the majority of cases, major brands were advertised next to extremist videos on the YouTube platform and on third-party websites that use the Guardian display network. And some of the ones that we found, I mean, there were pro-ISIS videos on YouTube and pro kind of Combat 18 Nazi videos on YouTube. And for some reason, the guys that were posting these videos had been allowed not only to join YouTube and to post videos, but to get themselves an AdSense account from Google, which allowed...
So to benefit financially.
Yeah, exactly, which allowed ads to be automatically placed onto their website, onto their video, and that's how the disparity arose.
And James, the industry knew about this opaque area, did they, or not?
So I would say that brand safety really isn't anything new, certainly to us at the IB. I think we've probably been working on the dawn of internet advertising since 2005. I think the prospect of appearing on the front page of a national newspaper has sharpened the focus of a lot of brands. And, you know, I would say categorically that there should never, ever be an instance whereby, you know, a brand, an advertiser, should have a situation where something is going to appear online or in any media for that fact that's going to compromise what they're trying to say or the values of that company. So, yeah, I don't think it's new. I think there's always been steps in place to do it, as I would say. I think the prospect of what's happened now has really sharpened the focus on lifting the bonnet on, okay, how is my agency operating? How are the places in which my advertiser is going to be? How do they operate? And I think a lot more through that whole value chain, which I think, as Alexi said, is or can be very complicated. It's kind of been lifted up, and every bit of that is now being scrutinised, which I think is right.
And Simon, do you think that scrutiny should amount to real regulation of this?
Don't know, that's probably a question that James
Well,
can
is
answer.
it doable even?
Well, I mean, I think
In
if
the
you,
way that radio, it's clearly doable.
yeah,
and
well, I
done.
think if you look at, interestingly, in the US, the MRC, the Media Ratings Council, was actually created after an instruction from the US Congress. So I kind of think I fully agree with James's point that actually what Alexi's great journalism has done is actually lift the lid on discussions that are being had in the industry for a long time. But what it's done is it's taken out of that kind of narrow media focus and exploded it into
Give
the
me a sense
consumer
what those discussions were then, the fears around them in the industry.
Well, I mean, I think, there's agencies, I think, have been asking Google and Facebook for more transparency for a significant amount of time. I think that's nothing new. I think that not just the articles that appeared recently, but if you look at Mark Pritchard, who's a global brand officer at P&G, his speech for a plea for more transparency and joined up thinking. This has been moving along for a while, and I think in what Alexi's article did in many ways is that if you're trying to resolve any disagreement, you talk, don't you, and you try and find a solution, and when one party feels that they can't get a solution, they move to another way, which I think Alexi's article was almost the leaping off point for certain agencies and clients to say, well, actually, we're not going to support this financially anymore. But those discussions have been going on for quite a while. And I think the challenge, just on for Facebook and Google specifically, and how much leverage media agencies and clients can have is slightly reduced by the huge long tail of their business. So for a media owner like us and many others in this room, media agencies and their clients will make up a huge proportion of revenue. For Facebook and Google, because of the long tail and the self-serve aspect of it, that's quite a significantly lower level. So the leverage that agencies can get to kind of get satisfaction in those discussions is significantly lower.
And what was your process in order to produce this article? Because it took it's gone, sorry, it was there, wasn't it? Did I mention it was there? What was the process you went through to find this? Was it difficult to find these things?
It was difficult to understand the nature of the problem, but once you got your head around the problem, so once you got your head around the fact that there was a problem within the industry of brands not knowing where their products were appearing, then it was relatively easy to find. I mean, it really was just a case of Googling, for a whole bunch of extremist stuff, and then it coming up and then noticing big brands on it. And actually, we were helped in the investigation by Google's own algorithms, because once you start looking for jihadi content, after a little bit of time, it's suggested to you, so you don't have to search for it anymore. It just appears on the right-hand side.
How long have you had the beard? Just curious.
It's all part of the disguise.
When you mentioned the media, the agencies and the media owner, who do you think has the most responsibility to provide the rigour that we're seeking here, that we're talking about?
Well, okay, if you book advertising with a traditional media owner, and I can only use radio as the best example, we're at the TuneIn conference, there's a rigorous process between commercial and programming that produces completely safe content. And that's our responsibility. And if we don't produce that, brands don't book on it. I think the challenge is when you move into platforms, and there's been a big discussion about whether Google and Facebook think of themselves as media owners. To my mind, if you're competing that aggressively for ad revenue, then you are a media owner. But what they're very good at is just saying, well, this is our platform, you put content on there, and step away from that responsibility to monitor and make sure that content is safe. So in our world, it's us who are responsible for making sure it's safe.
And your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we've got to be careful that we don't conflate. There's two things here, isn't there? There is the big social media platforms which have a belief that even though you don't agree with some of the stuff that might be on those platforms, they have a belief that people should be able to upload things so long as they're legal. And then there is a second issue, which is around brands being safe on those environments. So, the first is for the platforms to answer their stance on what they think should be on there. But, in my mind, as I said, there should be safeguards in place. That should be your absolute hygiene factor that, if you're going to take some money from a brand, however it's traded, whether it's picking up the phone to a media owner or it's through programmatic means, should always, as a default, be safe and be proper.
Yeah, I think to me, advertising, if you go back as far as 10 years, it was about targeting the right person at the right time in the right place. Is that for me, what programmatic has done is really elevated those first 2 points. So the right person at the right time, but actually the place is something that has been lost, because that is what great advertising has always been
And what's
about.
replaced it, do you think? Because I have
Data.
some thoughts on what's replaced it in political campaigners' use
Yeah.
of programmatic.
I think it's data.
targeting. Data.
It's the assumption that all you have to do is get the right person because of the behaviour that they've shown to deliver an advert. Well, actually, advertising has always been about the association of two brands, so a media brand and a product, and an audience that is suitable. I kind of think, programmatic is here to stay. It's never going to go. In many ways, it's fantastic, but I do think there has to be some rigour put in about context and where adverts are appearing.
Is it also a bit sinister?
I don't think it's sinister.
No more sinister than any advertising. Can be.
I think on responsibility, I think we've all got a responsibility, and the royal we, agencies, industry, media owners, I think we've all got that responsibility of we've got this incredible power at our fingertips around this data. If I really want to target that one lady with the red umbrella walking outside Odeon Leicester Square at 6:07 in the morning, then I could kind of do that. And the message I could show that person could be the fact that I know you're outside an Odeon and that you've got a red umbrella. I mean, that's pretty creepy stuff. But we're at the point where now we've got responsibility with that stuff. Now, that could be very, very useful to think about people who are going to Odeon and what sort of things they're watching. That doesn't mean I need to target that person. It doesn't mean that I need to explicitly let them know what I'm targeting with. So I think we're in a case of we've sort of overdosed on the science. If advertising's always been about the art and the science, ultimately where I'm going to put the message and what the message is, with programmatic, maybe we've overdosed on the science a little bit, and we've sort of gone down this rabbit hole of getting very detailed in what we're trying to do.
Did you want to say something?
I think it is a bit creepy. And I think that there is a good argument to make that the technology has, that the regulation has not caught up with technology. If you look at Facebook's advertising platform, for instance, anyone can do it, whether you're a big company or an individual, and you can target, the level to which you can target is pretty extraordinary. You can go down to 13 and 14-year-olds, and you can say, I want to target 13-year-old girls who like pages to do with depression. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily happening, but it's a potential, and it's
been alleged,
there.
hasn't it?
Well, yes,
That's
yes, it has. And exactly right. You probably know more than I do. But in Australia, there were leaked documents that suggested that Facebook was telling some, I think it was a bank. It wasn't an advertising client, but Facebook was telling a bank that it had the ability to identify 13 and 14 and 15-year-old
And their feelings.
and when they were feeling worthless.
Is that
Now-
sinister?
Well, again, I think it's responsibility. Just because we've got it doesn't mean that we need to do it. Now, I think any digital platform is going to garner a huge amount of information. You guys will, in terms of what people are listening to and when, and the kinds of things that will be interacting with it within apps.
Yeah.
Just because we've got it doesn't mean that we need to use it as an industry. I think we need to be a lot smarter and almost pull back and think about, I love what we were just talking about before in terms of what's the purpose of advertising. Is it to inspire, to educate? I think brands, agencies need to probably think about some of their goals as well. If your goal is to reach as many people possible for the lowest price possible, then there are going to be things that you cast aside to do that. Now, if brand safety is really important to you, and the fact that your ads are going to be seen by a human and not a machine, and that most of that ad is going to be seen on the screen, and that's what's important to you, then you may forfeit the cost bit. But that's what you're using to measure the success of what you're doing in digital. So I think that's really important as well. We don't just need to chase stuff because it's cheap and we've got all this data that we can use.
Yeah, I was going to say that, for me, everyone in this room, everyone who works in media at the moment, it's incredibly exciting, but also incredibly challenging to work in the industry at a time when it moved from analog to digital. And I think Sinead's excellent point earlier on about, you can assume things at the start of that change, that it's going to absolutely decimate and change thinking. And I think the point around e-readers and books is a really valid point. Is that everyone thought e-readers were going to be the end of books, but books had its biggest year last year. And I do think there's a parallel in the industry that we work in. Technology is firing along and assumed to change everything, and data will supersede everything else. But the reality is, I think as we get more into this, it won't be. Context and the power of brands will continue to be monumentally important.
Does the sheer scale of the internet, and this is one for all of you, I suppose, does the sheer scale of the internet and the lack of the comparative lack of regulation compared to broadcasting, for example, make it, yes, a fantastic market, but an incredibly dangerous one from your point of view? Or am I seeing dangers where you're not, perhaps, where you see opportunity?
Yeah, I think you'll find dangers anywhere in any walk of life, which is a slight cop-out of an answer, I know. But I think it comes back to sort of control and choice. And whether you're a brand or you're an agency, actually, indeed, if you're a media owner, you have, as long as you have that control and choice. And I think, to talk about YouTube for a second, I think, they put their hands up and said they got it wrong. I think they've been in listening mode, and I think they've come back and said, here's a load of steps that we've taken to make sure that actually if you are paying us money to run advertising, we're going to try and make it safer for you. But importantly, we're going to give you more control and choice. So based on what you want to do, actually you are able to turn the dials a lot easier, and we've made that a lot simpler. And I would say in the broader industry as well, that has to be the case. You've got to work with the right partners who are going to do that.
To be specific, control and choice over what specifically?
Where your ads are going to appear. So if I absolutely don't want my ads to appear, if I'm Liverpool FC and I don't want anything to appear on that's going to be targeted towards Everton fans, I mean, that's going to be quite an important thing for me. So I should be given that choice to be able to decide where I want that to go, in amongst all of this complexity that might be, programmatic and viewability and ad fraud. So, our role in all of this is to try and make things simple, and to try somehow, in the midst of this kind of thing, is to really shine a positive light on digital and maybe the things that it's helped us as well. Not to cast aside the issue, but don't forget that the ability for anyone to become a creator and upload a video to YouTube has meant that I can change the headlight in my car, which I've asked my dad to do many years ago. I'm empowered to do lots of things I could never do simply by watching a video or searching for something. Small businesses on Facebook who don't have thousands and millions to spend, can go on and advertise their shop between certain hours. So I think for all of the stuff that should never have happened, and we're right to throw the spotlight on it, let's not forget that the internet's pretty amazing at some of the things it's empowered us to do that we could never do before.
Were you about to say something there?
No? I was nodding in agreement.
Oh, okay. Did you?
Well, I think that outside of the fairly narrow debate about programmatic advertising, the relationship between the internet companies, the big internet companies, and regulation, and what we do about it as a society is one that's only going to get more heated as the months go on. Because what it seems to be is that Google and Facebook, at the center of their profit motive, at the center of what they are as a company, is a desire to expand. Their whole setup is predicated on expansion. And the more they expand, the more influence they have and the more profit they make. And that kind of inherent goal seems to be quite contradictory to the idea of safeguarding and to the idea of regulatory controls. So I think that there is a sort of structural tension there that is not going to go away. In terms of what specific pieces of legislation potentially should be put in place, I was having a talk the other day with Jeff Jarvis, who's a very kind of pro First Amendment guy from the US, and he was saying in no circumstances should Facebook or Google be regulated because it's just about a conversation that they're having. They're very different from publishers. It's arrogant to presume that they're publishers in the same way as we are. But I think that he's looking at it too binary. It's not a question of regulating Google and Facebook like publishers are, or no regulation. Maybe there's a middle ground where some regulation can be
a kind of bespoke.
Exactly. I mean, for example, if Facebook hosts a jihadist video all about how to make a bomb, maybe it shouldn't be held liable for that video in the same way as the Times would be if we published it on our website. But maybe it should be held liable if it was told about that video and yet it failed to take it down within a reasonable time. So I think that there's quite a lot of scope for kind of creatively thinking about how to make sure that companies like Facebook and Google are allowed to continue the sort of the socially very valuable work that they're doing, but within a sort of safe environment. Well,
there's a degree, isn't there, in which the internet was, and maybe always will be, the Wild West on the fringes, because, well, you only have to look at it for an hour to see that that's the case, and it's almost like trying to knit jelly to regulate the internet because there is so much of it. And do you believe that when it comes specifically to advertising, that there can be, I'm trying to think the best way to put this, that there must always be a human eye on things on the internet before they're out there. Is that even feasible?
Scale's an issue. I think what did YouTube say? I think 400 hours a minute is uploaded. You know, I think if you were to do back of a fag packet maths, that would be an incredible number of people and an awful a lot of money to spend on that. And I think, you know, specifically, this is a company who have put, you know, vehicles on the streets without drivers in them. They've put hot air balloons in the sky over sub-Saharan Africa to provide Wi-Fi. I feel like them hiring a load of humans to come and look at this stuff. I feel like if any company in the world can solve this and almost self-regulate themselves, if that's, you know, not a conflict of interest, then it should, you know, then it should be Google. But, you know, I would find it hard to sit here and disagree with what Alexi said in terms of this middle ground of regulation. We can certainly talk about it on this stage. I think if you went and asked 10 people in the street, it's common sense that, you know, we shouldn't see these things on these platforms, and when they're flagged, they should be absolutely taken down as soon as possible. And by the way, brands should never, ever, ever have to appear next to them or in any way between them or anything like that.
Well, I was just going to follow on from that point. I kind of think that this idea that we have to trust Facebook and Google and this we'll sort it out, thank you very much, that's, I think, what infuriates the media industry. And I remember last year and the Facebook video views discrepancy, I kind of, in my head, I couldn't help thinking, well, what happens if the radio industry had gone to the advertising market and said, I'm sorry, we've miscalculated radar for the last 10 years, but don't worry, no one lost any money and we've sorted it out now. You know, the response would have been huge.
Yes.
I mean, it wouldn't have been you sort it out, and it's fine, we trust you.
Well, and a word on fake news. I think we are going to have time just for a couple of questions from the audience at the end, but just a word on fake news, and I'm going to pick it up again later with Tessa and Tina when we speak about the political aspect of all of this, particularly with an election coming. But I noticed in two newspapers, Times and Telegraph, if I'm not mistaken, Facebook took an ad out the other day with, I think it was about 5 or 6 or 7 handy pointers towards spotting fake news, right? And I thought it was ironic that Facebook was using a newspaper to tell people how to spot fake news or not. And what struck me was, and I know the BBC is a unique creature in a sense, but what struck me was all they were doing was saying, if you can be bothered to check whether something's true or not, here's how you might think about doing it on the internet. Whereas the BBC, at its best, and good journalism anywhere at its best, has already done that for you. And putting the onus on the plethora of readers and viewers and listeners out there to do it for themselves, Lord knows where that takes us, back to the Wild West, I think. I mean, your thoughts on that? I mean, that looks great, Facebook being responsible, but it's so empty, is it not?
Well, I think it goes back to the point making around context is really important. I mean, they could have put that message anywhere, but they chose to put it in newspapers. I think, they're a brand who will want to tell stories as well, and they clearly want to have a voice on this. I think if you look at, we're here to try and talk about digital in a positive way, but I'm by no means blinkered by the power of other media. Look at a brand like Apple, which is a fundamentally digital brand. I mean, spend next to nothing on digital versus what they do in outdoor and in print and all other. They want to tell stories, and I think if Facebook want to tell a story that's appropriate to people, then they're going to put it in those places.
It's fine. No, it's not the place really that was the issue. That was just ironic to me. But the actual message felt a bit hollow because it's putting the onus on some of the people who would call my phone in, and it is tantamount to impossible to get them to accept a fact that you offer them.
I think the placement of
telling
that
them
ad,
to check the facts.
I think that placement of that ad is important because what Facebook are trying to do is use the trust of that brand for their advertising. And I think that it is about choice. But ultimately, as I said before, advertising is about brands. And I think this change in digital has given us a huge amount of change to deal with. But as we go through it and work through it, which I think Alexi's piece and other stuff this year is enabling us to do, it will be about the power of brands. And if you care about, and you're an advertiser, you care about your brand, you will place it in safe brands where you know where you know what the content is.
Absolutely. I don't have much to add apart from the fact that I think you put your finger on a major issue. Facebook and Google, the last thing they want to do is be proactive about this in the sense of employing people to do the sort of searches that I was doing. They don't want to do that because they don't want to editorialize content, because then they'll be seen not as a conduit but as a publisher. So they're willing to put a lot of resources into employing people to review content that has been flagged by someone else, and they're willing to put a lot of resources into telling people how to flag that content.
But not sieving it first.
But not sieving it first, exactly.
Any questions from the audience? I'm told we have a couple of mics, do we, around? Yes, there's a lady there with a mic. Any question to Simon, Alexi or James? Oh, you're a very shy audience. Oh.
Tim McCabe, isn't it?
There he is.
Hi, very interesting panel. Thank you. Tim McCabe, GTN. You talked about precise or targeting of ads through programmatic. Are there any good examples that you could tell us, possibly James, about precision targeting and how effective campaigns have been through that form of of advertising?
I would say, without specific campaigns coming to mind, I would say broadly, the more relevant you can make something to someone, I would argue the more effective it's going to be. Now, that could be something as big as just identifying that you're a man rather than a woman. Therefore, if I have a product that is only suitable for women, then there probably isn't much need for me to target that with. It could be something as simple as time of day. It could be around opening hours of a shop. So I think it doesn't always need to be the minute, very personal, slightly creepy details that we've talked about. But I think the more relevant you can make something, again, comes back to the message that you've got and where you're putting it. I would argue that's going to be more effective. And I think programmatic's a brilliant means of helping you doing it if we don't sort of overspill on the science of it and disappear down the rabbit hole of 20 different targeting things that I can target those 3 people in the world that meet those qualities.
I think on that point, we can't stick our heads in the sand and programmatic is here to stay, and it's something that we have to deal with. I think for me, the really encouraging aspects over the last few months is that we're starting to open up discussions that have been going on for a while about transparency, about the supply chain, who's making money, about context, about brands, which I think is good for the industry. But we're not going to uninvent programmatic. It's going to expand to all other media as well eventually.
Anything to add on?
No, I mean, apart from the fact I agree, none of the issues raised is going to impact fundamentally on the attraction of being able to target appropriate customers. So, yeah, I agree, programmatic is here to stay.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your question, and thank you very much to Simon, to James, and to Alexi.